So as you guys know who have been following the channel, my car is being stored in my garage while I am in PA school. And as PA school is approaching the end, I should be done at the end of July and really start to get into the job sometime in October. That means it's time to start looking back at the 350Z. The Mini has been great. It has really been an enjoyable car to drive, and it will still get track time and daily usage and all that. But the 350Z is our primary track car. So what I'm going to go over today is update number 2 on what parts we're going to be using on this car compared to the original overview that we did a couple of years ago, which I will link the playlist up here just so you guys can go back and look at what our original plans were. In that video, I went around on all of the primary systems and explained what parts we have now, what parts I plan to originally run in the future. And while a lot of that is still the same, there are some updates that I'd like to address. Of course, I don't have the parts purchased yet, so it's something we'll just go over on the computer. I've got a list. And you also have to remember that I'm looking at ultimately TT4 and ST4, so I really have to watch my power to weight. So that's the reason we're not going to throw a bunch of money at the engine. We're just going to do a basic rebuild, maybe add a tiny bit more power, but the more power we add, the more ballast we have to run. And while yes, we can kind of balance out where that ballast is at, it's kind of getting to the point of I'm spending more money on engine parts just to spend money on trying to add ballast to the car, and ultimately I'm not going to be left with a faster race car. So let's get into those parts and see what we have to look forward to this fall. So here are the modifications that we have planned for the car. As you can see, right now I have it divided into stage 1 and stage 2, and that is not a hard line in the sand. That's one thing I want to put out there from day one, is things will probably happen in an organic manner. The only thing that is sort of set in stone is, number one, the car does need an engine rebuild, and that will be covered in probably a 3 or 4 part series that we'll do later on. Cylinder number 5 is a little low on compression, so I'll recheck it when we restart the car just to make sure that everything is still on the up and up, and we'll decide, do I rebuild the engine or do I try to do a few track days on it before rebuilding it over the winter? Because I'm going to finish school in August, and then I will have the rest of the year where, yeah, maybe I could go out, drive the car, enjoy it a little bit as I collect parts and get moved and get settled in my new job. Or it might be that because the engine is not up to snuff, I will rebuild it and we will just restart tracking in 2022. So for stage 1, we are really focusing on a suspension setup. The biggest thing that I think is holding this car back is its suspension. Braking is fine. Power output of the engine is fine. The aero is fine. The biggest letdown right now for me is the suspension. We're going to start out with some Feel 441 Plus coilovers. The 441 Plus means I can designate that I want a road racing damping setup, and I can also get Swift springs with it that are lighter and are also a higher quality coil. To make sure all of that is used as properly as possible, we are going to be going with a set of Z1 suspension arms. It comes with an A-arm in the front, a camber and tow arm in the rear. We can get those with solid bushings, which is what we're going to do. Because the Feel 441 Plus, I can get that as a true coilover setup and get rid of the spring jacks in the rear. I am going to be going with an ISR rear lower control arm so that I have the most adjustability in the rear as I possibly can, which means we won't need the eccentric bolt anymore. So we're going to go with an eccentric lockout. To accommodate the lowering of the car, we're going to be going with a roll center adjuster and a bump stop corrector from Megan Racing. They seem to be the only people who make those parts at a reasonable price for this car. We're not going to lower the car too much. Right now the car is sitting about 3/4 of an inch lower than stock on those Tyne S-Tech springs, which is probably where we'll leave it. I might lower it a little bit more, so it'll be maybe a total of a 1-inch drop. We'll be looking at trying to do negative 2.5 degrees of camber in the front and negative 2 in the rear, with maybe an 1/8 inch of toe out in the front and 0 toe in the rear. The Z1 arms do offer a little bit of adjustment for caster, not too much, but some. So we will try to get that balance side to side wherever that number ends up. I'm not overly concerned about it. I don't want too much caster because it is going to make my steering effort go up, and with the manual steering, that's the last thing that I need. Because the car will be lower, we will be running a set of custom end links to make sure that we don't have any preload through the sway bars. We're going to be dropping the rear subframe and replacing the stock bushings with a set of solid bushings. While we're in there, we'll also go ahead and do all of the arms outside the car. So we'll drop it down, replace everything, and lift it back up into one unit. I also have already purchased a set of rear Brembo Calipers. So those were in stage 2, but have been moved up to stage 1, and we'll be throwing those on with everything out of the car. The battery that is on the car right now is on a battery tender, but it was on its way out when I stored the car, so I have no doubt that it is going to be basically dead by the time I start the car 2.5 years later. It should be good enough for me to get it off and on a trailer so we can get it moved, but once we replace the battery, if I'm going to pay to replace one, I'm going to go ahead and get a lightweight battery, even though right now we do need to run ballast for our classing. How much ballast we end up needing and where we line up, that's going to be a bridge we have to cross once we get a cage put in it. I can do time trials right now with this setup, so it'll be a little bit different, but again, we'll cover that in a video once we're ready to go racing. For wheels and tires, I'm going to be going with a set of Koenig decograms in an 18-inch by 9.5-inch wheel. With the offset on these wheels, which I think is a plus 25 offset, it should have the outside of the barrel of the wheel in the exact same location my current stock wheel is in. The added width will be on the inside of the wheel, so I can get rid of my 25mm spacers. So this wheel and tire package should save us a little bit of weight, but obviously we're going to be able to run a much wider tire than the 235 and 245 that's on there right now. I'm thinking I'm going to be running the Federal RSR Pro in a 255 40 R18 square setup. I need to make sure that I stay under the required size for my classing, which is a 265. They have a standard width. You can print off a little template and make sure your wheels are narrow than the required size. So with a 255, I should be safe. We can go up to a 265 later. If I find out that I have plenty of room to work with, these 255s will work perfect for the first set of tires. After that, once we get into stage 2, this one is going to become in a little bit more bits and pieces. Stage 1, I'm probably going to go out there and just burn a hole in my credit card and buy all of that at one time and do everything together. Go out there, and that way I can start baselining the car and adjusting the setup. The rest of this stuff is going to come in a trickle for stage 2. Like I said, down there at the bottom, those Brembo calipers, we already bought them. We'll probably go ahead and throw those on the car. It just kind of depends on how much life I have on those brake pads. I might keep the current setup that I have and just burn through those brake pads at some track days and then upgrade to those G-Lock pads down there at the bottom once we have a little bit more time. The 2-piece rotors from Z1 Motorsports, eventually we'll be upgrading to those. So once I throw the Brembos on is when I'll do that. So those floating calipers in the rear might stay on for a little while because I don't want to be buying duplicate parts. So go ahead, wear out the parts I've got. Once they wear out, then I can upgrade at that time. So braking is probably what we're going to address first, but it just kind of depends on when everything wears out. We'll also be upgrading to StopTech's RBF 660 fluid, and we're going to be bracing the master cylinder. The one I've got on there now doesn't really seem to do anything, but I want to make sure that master cylinder is not moving and all my brake force is being applied into the system. Going back up to the top, for aero, the aluminum light aero I have on there now is actually working great. I really do think it makes a difference. I can really feel it, especially at the long straights at Roebling Road and Road Atlanta. But it has seen better days. It's been abused a little bit. So what I want to do is those exhaust tweaks I've got listed under the engine section, I want to try and tuck up the exhaust under the car a little bit tighter. So we'll be shortening the test pipes a little bit and maybe changing out a few different pieces so that we can run the exhaust completely up under the car and go with a full flat bottom. So we'll have a full Alumilite under tray. We're going to be redoing the diffuser. There's a lot of changes I want to make. They're small changes, but they will really add up. We'll end up with a few pieces from Professional Awesome. What I think we're going to be doing is they have a set of large fender vents to replace the current ones I have. The ones I have now do a great job of venting out the air, but these vents are going to be even bigger. We'll get even more air out. And the reason we need those is we're also going to be using some diffusers from Professional Awesome that go on the front splitter, and what those do is should increase our front downforce significantly. We'll combine all that with a wing from 9 Lives Racing. It won't be anything crazy, just a pretty standard rear wing I will be looking at doing some CFD on the car and trying to figure out, how balanced is my aero package, what things could I change, what things do I need to work on, scanning the car into a computer and running some simulations to see where I'm at and what needs to be changed. One thing that is going to take a while, and it'll be sort of a labor of love, is those fiberglass body panels. I went ahead and weighed my gutted doors, and they still weigh 55 pounds a piece. The rear hatch still weighs about 50 pounds. And the whole front end, though it is not too heavy, I would love to have a one-piece front end that includes a front fascia, the hood, and both front fenders so that I can easily lift that off and have full access to the front of the car. So there will be a lot of work involved in that. That will probably happen winter of 2022 into 2023 so that I can replace all that, drop a bunch of weight off the car. That'll be in combination with doing the cage, because replacing the doors, so the cage is going to have to take over impact protection from the door bars. So that one will definitely be off in the future, but it will be really, really cool to have a car where I can lift off the entire front end. The whole front end should only weigh 20 or 30 pounds. We're going to do in fiberglass first, eventually. As I'm a little later in life and maybe the fiberglass is beat up a little bit, we can change it out for carbon fiber, but it's already going to cost about $1,000 to do the full body of the car myself. Carbon fiber would cost probably 3 or 4 times as much. But when I'm done, the car should look much cleaner, it should look much more professional, and it should be a lot more efficient. It should be a lot lighter. There's a lot of benefits to me replacing out all these panels. Now, while the point of that engine rebuild I talked about is not to make more power, we will end up making a little bit more power, and we might, tweak that with a restrictor depending on where our weight and our classing comes out, because I really want to stay in ST4 or TT4. But we're going to go ahead and upgrade the fuel pump to a Walbro 255 just to give it a little bit more fuel. I want to do a return style system so that we're not heating the fuel up quite as much with it just sitting there in the fuel rail and getting hot. We'll probably leave the stock fuel tank the way it is, but I will probably be adding on different fuel pickup. They have some really incredible things that they've come up with so that your fuel level can get lower and lower and it can continue to draw fuel into the pump. So we're going to try and modify the stock fuel tank so I can avoid fuel starvation for that much longer, because there are some shorter endurance races, like 4-hour long races, that I think would be really cool to do. While yes, no matter what, I'm going to have to do refueling, it would be nice to do a fewer number of fuel stops or only the required minimum number of fuel stops, because every other fuel stop is really going to add a lot of time. Just to protect the engine, we are going to be doing an AccuSump just to give me a little bit of extra protection. I'll also probably eventually do a custom oil pan with some baffles and different things just to protect it that much more. Like I said a little earlier, we will be doing a full cage. I'm not sure when that'll happen. That will probably happen winter 2022 into 2023. I haven't quite decided on what type of diff I want to use. Right now, I'm looking at the Tomei diffs, but Z1 just released a diff for the Z that is kind of their in-house design. There's also Wave Track, which I would much rather have the Wave Track because I don't have any clutches to worry about. And the way they've got that set up, even if I lose traction on that inside wheel, normally a helical diff like that will just become completely open. It has to have some traction to the other wheel to work as an LSD, but the way they've got it set up, it works no matter what. So that's definitely something to consider. I'm not sure when I'm going to do the tranny rebuild in the shift kit. I will probably end up doing that whenever the engine is out of a car. That seems to make the most sense. We're not going to do anything crazy, but it can easily handle the power levels that we're putting through it, but just tighten it up a little bit, make it a little bit crisper, and just make it last for that much longer. One thing I'm really interested in doing, and I have no idea when I'm going to try to do this, I may again do this when the engine is out for the rebuild, but I want to push the engine, the transmission, and the driver further back in the car. It may have to wait until we cage the car because of where my roll bar is currently bolted in. The cage will sit a little bit further back, but that will move the 3 heaviest objects in the car further back. It looks like I can only move it back anywhere from 8 to 12 inches before I start having to modify the trans tunnel and the firewall, which I'm not allowed to do without penalty in my classing. So we'll see how much we can move it back, but that will require a shortened drive shaft, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. At $500 to have a brand new drive shaft that's lighter than the factory carbon fiber piece, that's not really that much to ask. Also want to do a lightweight steering column, because I want to simplify the factory steering column, and with me being moved back in the car, we will have to adjust that quite a bit. So it should make things a lot more simple while also taking a bunch of weight off the driver's side of the car. Of course, there are more things I want to do to the car, but this really covers the bulk of it. That will cover maybe 90-95% of the things that I have planned for it right now. Eventually, as I mentioned in my Dream VQ video, we're going to be doing a crazy HR naturally aspirated swap. But with this fresh rebuild on the DE, that will be way off in the future. But for right now, once this list is done, which will probably be sometime in 2023 would be my guess, that will be how the car will live for probably the next 10 years. There will be little things, it'll never be completely done, but this should cover most of it. So of course, if you guys have any recommendations, if you have any questions, feel free to drop those below. Hit that subscribe button, and I will see you guys next week.